Pain resists language, says Elaine Scarry in her book, The Body in Pain. To grasp the presence of physical pain, we need associative cues or imagery, like a weapon or a wound. In the Ramayana, Lakshmana cuts off Surpanakha's nose as punishment for her sexual forwardness. This is my initial research and observations on how this moment of violence is illustrated in contemporary tellings. In this 1970 comic by Indian publisher Amar Chitrakatha, text describes the mutilation. We see no weapon, no blood, just some missing lines on Surpanakha's nose. The text implies she is shouting for help, not from pain. Surpanakha means sharp nails. She is always positioned as the monstrous or dangerous female against Sita, who is made the ideal woman. This comparison is clear in the staging of both characters within this scene in this 1978 comic. Here again, the text tells us what Lakshmana does. We see his sword and a slightly more discernible attempt at drawing Surpanakha's mutilated nose. There is still no blood, and apart from a minor breaking of panel border for emphasis, her pain isn't given an expression. Sita's fear competes with Surpanakha's for our attention. In this 2007 comic, Sita's fear is anchored in the text. Lakshmana's weapon appears as a moment before setup, and the act itself is described through text again. The following panel attempts to explore pain in ways that the other two comics do not. We are told Surpanakha howls loudly, even if it is a cartoonish boo-hoo-hoo. This time, she is also looking at her wound, even as the text tries to tell us about blood that is not shown. The Ramayana is not a horror film, but we can read Surpanakha's mutilation in context of how horror films are viewed. In her writings on film and media, Barbara Creed states that the horror genre creates horrific images on screens in order to disconnect a viewer from the viewing experience and actively dares them to continue looking. In those moments, she says, the viewer becomes a spectator whose voyeurism is punished. Even if Surpanakha is shown feeling pain, are we challenged to look away? Are we encouraged to feel or comprehend her pain? In her writing, Creed also addresses the function of the monstrous in horror films. Surpanakha is positioned as the monstrous to threaten the symbolic order of the good and pure humans. She enters the scene as a human and undergoes a transformation into not human before being attacked. When we are not directly shown her transformation from human to monstrous, the text leads us to believe this. The 1978 comic tells us Surpanakha transforms after being attacked. But by placing that piece of information in the same text box that tells us of Lakshmana's attack, the panel implies that his attack was on Surpanakha the monster, not Surpanakha the human. We are actively discouraged from feeling Surpanakha's pain because she is clearly marked as the other. Outside the Amar Chitrakatha universe is the 2010 picture book Ramayana Divine Loophole. In the mutilation scene, Surpanakha is a wild creature. She attacks Sita before we cut to the moment after Lakshmana attacks her. There is blood on his sword and on her mutilated nose. Any violence and pain that could be communicated here is dismissed on the next page when an angry Surpanakha reappears with 2 band-aids on her wound. In this 1992 Indo-Japanese animation, Surpanakha transforms, but not to the same extent as the printed examples. There is no narration to describe what Lakshmana does. We watch him throw his weapon at Surpanakha. In complete contrast to the book versions, we are never shown her mutilated face. The cues we are given to Surpanakha's pain come from her bodily gestures and her cries as she flees. Nigerian academic Bibi Bakare Yusuf says pain doesn't resist language, it resists speech. It has its own expression. We never see blood or a wound here, but there is just enough shown around the contours of both those ideas. As we attempt to reconcile the concept of depicting violence and pain, these illustrated examples are still a step away from reality. In 2010, the world learned about Bibi Aisha, whose family mutilated her face. How does the real compare against the illustrated here? We are challenged to keep looking despite the instinct to look away. Barbara Creed's writing on horror also insists that images of bodily fluids are critical to social constructs of the horrific. Bibi Aisha's photographer was praised for depicting her with dignity, but was also criticized for focusing on her appearance. Does this clean but visceral image push us to comprehend the pain of having one's nose sliced off? On the cover of Time magazine, this image, paired with the text, turns Bibi Aisha and her pain into a synecdoche for a whole country, much like Surpanakha is for the bad woman. Both women's bodies are sites for violence, their pain made into cautionary tales that are not about them. As a woman and nonfiction illustrator, I ask myself, what is the role of an image maker in presenting moments of violence inflicted on another? When do these images become spectacles? How do we illustrate violence without ignoring pain? Thank you.